the trees started whispering my name the second I stepped onto the trail. You're listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So this happened last fall when I drove up to the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire, specifically to the Lincoln Woods trailhead. It was October 28th, a Thursday. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot at exactly 3:47 p.m. The sun already starting to dip behind the massive peaks of the Franconia Range, casting these long, deep shadows that made the autumn colors look less vibrant and more like a faded, bloody smear across the hillsides. I remember the time so clearly because I glanced at my phone right after I killed the engine, checking for a signal I already knew wouldn't be there. Feeling that mix of excitement and low-grade anxiety you get when you're truly about to be alone in the woods. My plan was simple, a 3-day solo loop, hitting the Franconia Ridge and coming back down through the Bemidji-Wasset wilderness. Something I'd done before, but never this late in the season. My pack was heavy with a winter bag and extra provisions, just in case. The air was crisp and cold, smelling of damp earth and pine needles, and the only sound was the distant rush. The east branch of the Bemidji-Wasset River flowing under the old railroad tie bridge. That marks the start of the trail. I got my boots laced up tight, shrugged into my pack, and did that last-minute pat down of my pockets, keys, phone, wallet. A ritual that feels like locking the door to civilization behind you. There was one other car in the lot, an older Subaru Forester with Vermont plates. A dusting of pine pollen and a faint film of dirt on it like it had been there a day or two, which wasn't too weird. Lots of folks do multi-day trips here. I figured they were already out there, deep in the wilderness, lately setting up camp somewhere near Liberty Springs by now. I locked my car, left the parking permit visible on the dashboard, and started walking across that long bridge, the wooden planks echoing under my boots with a hollow, lonely sound that seemed to get swallowed by the noise of the water below. The river was high and fast with recent rain, a churning, grayish-cold beast of water, and looking down into it made me feel a little dizzy, a sense of vertigo that had me gripping the railing a little tighter. The other end of the bridge is where the real trail begins, a wide, flat path that used to be a railroad bed, so it's an easy walk for the first few miles, just a gentle incline through a tunnel of birch and spruce. Kind of trail that lulls you into a rhythm, a false sense of security. I remember feeling so good, so free, the weight of my pack settling into a comfortable burden, my breath making little clouds in the air, the crunch of gravel underfoot, all the usual sounds of a hike. But after about 20 minutes of walking, I started to get this feeling, you know, the one, prickling on the back of your neck like you're being watched. I shook it off, blamed it on the time of year, the spooky season getting to me, the way the light was fading faster than I'd anticipated, turning the woods into a mess of confusing shadows. Every stump looked like a crouching animal. Every oddly shaped branch looked like a bone-white hand reaching out. I kept walking, trying to focus on the sound of my own breathing, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It intensified, and then I heard it, a sound that was just slightly out of place. Not the scuttle of a squirrel or or the call of a bird, but a soft rhythmic crunching on the path behind me, keeping perfect pace with my own steps. I stopped dead, my heart hammering against my ribs, and the sound stopped a half-second later. The silence that followed was absolute. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath. No birds, no wind, just a distant, muted rush of the river. I turned around slowly, expecting to see a deer, maybe a moose, or even the owner of that Subaru coming back out early, but the path behind me was empty, just a straight shot of dim, shadowy trail fading into the darkness between the trees. Nothing. I stood there for a full minute, maybe two, just listening, my ears straining for any sound, but there was only that heavy, waiting silence. Finally, I shrugged it off again, chalking it up to an echo or my imagination. I started walking a little faster this time, and immediately the sound started again, a soft, deliberate crunch, crunch, crunch that matched my stride exactly. Step for step, it was right behind me, close enough that I felt like I should feel its breath on my neck. But when I spun around this time, faster, my hand going to the bear spray on my hip, there was still nothing there, just the empty trail. The feeling of dread solidified in my gut. A cold, heavy stone. This wasn't my imagination. This was something else, something aware. I decided not to stop again, to just keep moving, to get to the first backcountry campsite before full dark. The map said it was only another mile or so to the Liberty Springs Trail Junction, where there's a designated site. I picked up my pace, and the sound behind me picked up its pace. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It wasn't trying to hide itself anymore. It was letting me know it was there, a predator toying with its prey. I wanted to run, but that's the worst thing you can do, right? It triggers the chase instinct, so I just walked. Faster and faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps now. The weight of my pack feeling like it was filled with stones. The world around me seemed to shrink to the circle of light from my headlamp. The trees pressing in closer, their branches clawing at my jacket. And then I saw something up ahead on the trail. A dark shape slumped on the ground. My first thought was that it was a bear, a dead animal, something. I slowed down, my hand shaking as I fumbled for my brighter flashlight. I clicked it on and the beam landed on a backpack, a modern internal frame pack. It was just sitting there in the middle of the trail, leaning against a tree as if someone had just taken it off for a rest. But there was no one around. The feeling of wrongness was overwhelming. I approached it slowly. Crunching sound behind me had stopped the moment I'd seen the pack. Like whatever it was also watching, also waiting. I shone my light around the area, looking for signs of a struggle, but there were none. The pack was clean, no tears, no blood. It was just there. I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice sounded small and thin, swallowed by the trees. No answer. I nudged the pack with my boot, and it fell over onto its side with a soft thud. It was fully loaded. I could tell by the way it fell. It had weight to it. Who would just abandon a full pack in the middle of the trail? It didn't make any sense. Against every better instinct I have, I knelt down, my own pack feeling like a turtle shell on my back, and I unbuckled the top flap of the abandoned pack. My fingers were numb with cold and fear. I shone my light inside, and the first thing I saw was a fleece jacket, a water bladder, some Cliff bars, normal hiking gear. And then my light glinted off something metallic. I reached in and pulled out a small silver compass, the kind you see in army surplus stores. But the needle wasn't pointing north. It was spinning lazily, slowly, like it was stuck in molasses. Round and round it went, not catching on anything, just spinning. A cold dread washed over me. I dropped the compass like it was on fire and it landed in the dirt. The needle still spinning wildly, and that's when I heard it, not from behind me, but from the trees to my right, a low, wet sound like something heavy and rotten being dragged through dry leaves, and then a whisper so faint I almost thought I imagined it. Voice that didn't sound human. It sounded like rocks grinding together. It just said one word, my name. I froze, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. That whisper was like a physical touch, a cold finger tracing the shape of my ear, and it knew my name. How could it possibly know my name? My mind was racing, scrambling for any logical explanation. An echo, a trick of the wind through the pines. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe it was just a sound my terrified brain had twisted into a familiar syllable, but I knew, deep in that primal part of your brain that knows true danger, I knew it had spoken my name. The dragging sound in the trees stopped. The forest was again plunged into that unbearable, watchful silence. I couldn't move. I was kneeling there in the dirt, one hand on the abandoned pack, the other gripping my flashlight, so tight my knuckles were white. The beam was shaking, dancing over the pine needles and roots. I forced myself to look up, to shine the light into the wall of blackness between the tree trunks. But the light didn't penetrate far. It was like the darkness was a solid thing, a thick velvet curtain that absorbed the beam after just a few feet. I saw nothing, just the vague, shifting shapes of trees in the periphery. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a panicked bird trying to escape its cage. I had to move, I had to get out of there. Staying still felt like inviting whatever. It was to come closer, to finish whatever it had started with the owner of that pack. I shoved myself up from the ground, my legs trembling. I didn't even think about the abandoned pack anymore. I left it there, the compass still spinning its silent, insane warning in the dirt. I turned and started walking down the trail again, not fast, not slow. Just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to control my breathing, trying to be quiet, but every crunch of my boot on the gravel sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I listened for the sound behind me, for that matching footstep, but there was nothing. Just my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. The silence was somehow worse. It was a waiting silence, a hungry silence. I kept my flashlight beam fixed on the trail ahead, my eyes darting to every shadow, every movement caught in the edge of the light. The trail began to climb more steeply, leaving the old railroad grade and starting its proper ascent into the mountains. The trees grew thicker, the spaces between them darker, the air grew colder, a deep, damp cold that seeped through my layers and found my skin. I checked my watch. It was only 5:15 p.m., but it felt like midnight. The darkness under the canopy was absolute, a complete void that my little circle of light could barely push back. I was desperately trying to reach the junction sign, a familiar landmark, a piece of civilization that would mean I was almost to the campsite. Place where there might be other people, normal people with normal fears like bears and blisters. Not this, not whispers in the dark that know your name. I finally saw the wooden signpost up ahead, a beautiful, mundane sight. The arrow pointing left to the Liberty Springs Trail. I almost cried with relief. I pushed myself harder, my thighs burning, my pack straps digging into my shoulders. I reached the junction and put my hand on the cool, weathered wood of the sign, just to touch something real, something made by human hands. I shone my light down the Liberty Springs Trail, expecting to see the soft glow of a campfire or the twinkle of headlamps at the designated tent site a half-mile up. But there was nothing, just more impenetrable blackness that was weird. The site is space for like 20 people, and on a holiday weekend like this, it should be packed. A sinking feeling started in my gut, deeper than the cold. I pulled out my map, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. I tried to trace my route with a finger, confirming I was in the right place. And that's when I noticed the first real, undeniable wrong thing. The names on the sign were wrong. The arrow pointing left didn't say Liberty Springs Trail, it said something else. Something scratched into the wood, crude and deep, like it had been done with a knife or a sharp rock. It said, "He is waiting." I stared at it, my brain refusing to process the words. This had to be a joke, some stupid vandalism. Some kids trying to be edgy, but the carving looked old. Wood was stained dark in the grooves, weathered like it had been there for seasons. I shone my light on the other arm of the sign, the one that should point back the way I came to the Lincoln Woods trailhead, but it didn't. The familiar name was gone, scraped away, and in its place another phrase was carved. "You shouldn't have come." A sob caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. I was here last summer. This sign was normal. This was a maintained trail in a national forest. This doesn't happen. I backed away from the sign, tripping over a root and landing hard on my pack, the air whooshing out. I lay there for a second, stunned. Looking up at the sliver of night sky, I could see between the treetops there were no stars, no moon, just a flat, black emptiness. Like a lid had been closed over the world. I scrambled to get up, fighting against the weight of my pack, panic starting to set in for real now, a sharp, metallic taste in my mouth. I had to get to the campsite. It was my only plan, my only hope for some semblance of safety. I turned my back on the terrifying sign and started hustling up the Liberty Springs Trail. Path was much narrower here, steeper, riddled with roots, rocks that seemed to grab at my feet in the shaky beam of my light. Was maybe a quarter mile, and when I saw the first cairn, those man-made piles of rock that marked the trail above tree line. But we were nowhere near tree line. We were deep in the woods, and this cairn was wrong. The rocks were a dark, almost black stone, not the gray granite you see up here. And they were stacked perfectly, precisely like an obelisk. And sitting on top of it was a small, dark object. I slowed down, my breath hitching. I didn't want to look, I didn't want to see, but I had to. I shone my light on it, and it was a phone. A modern smartphone. Its screen was cracked, but it was on, glowing with a faint, sickly light. The wallpaper was a picture of a smiling couple, a man and a woman in hiking gear, standing on a mountain summit. I recognized this Lafayette. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and picked it up. The screen was icy cold, and as I touched it, the image changed. It flickered, and now it was a picture of the same couple, but they were here on this trail. Their faces pale and terrified, their eyes wide with a fear I now understood intimately. Behind them, just out of focus, was a tall, thin shadow standing between the trees. The phone buzzed in my hand. A notification popped up. It was a text message from an unknown number. The message just said, "Turn around." I dropped the phone as if it had electrocuted me. It clattered on the rocks of the cairn, the screen going black. I backed away, my mind screaming. This was beyond any prank, beyond any rational explanation. I was in something that was aware of me, playing with me. I started running. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I didn't care about triggering a chase. Just had to get to that campsite. I had to see another human face. I crashed up the trail, my back slamming against my back, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning with the cold, thin air. For what felt like an eternity of blind, panicked flight, I saw a flat area through the trees. Familiar outline of a wooden tent platform. Thank God, I stumbled into the campsite. My light sweeping across the platforms, the fire, ring, the bare box. It was all there, but it was empty, completely deserted. Not a single tent. Not a single person. The fire ring was cold and full of ashes, but that wasn't the worst part. On every single tent platform, on the wooden planks, were dozens of those little black rock cairns, stacked with impossible precision, and on each one of them sat a small, personal item: a watch, a water bottle, a pair of glasses, a knife, like offerings on tiny altars. The entire campsite was a shrine to absence, a monument to things left behind. I stood in the center of the clearing, turning in a slow circle, my light illuminating this nightmare gallery, and that's when I heard it again, the whisper, but this time it wasn't from the trees. It was right next to my ear, so close I could feel the cold air move with the words, and it said my name again, followed by two more words: "I'm here." And I screamed, "Hurrah!" Ragged sound that tore out of my throat and seemed to get swallowed by the oppressive silence of the clearing. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting a wild arc through the darkness, expecting to see a face, a shape, anything. But there was nothing, just the empty platforms with their creepy little cairns in the dark, watching trees pressing in on all sides. Cold feeling of that whisper lingered on my ear like a frostbite kiss. I was shaking uncontrollably, my teeth chattering, not just from the cold, but from a fear so deep it felt like my bones were vibrating. I couldn't stay here. This place was wrong. It was a trap. Collection point for whatever this thing was. I had to move, but where? Going back down the trail meant passing that sign, passing that abandoned pack. Going forward meant ascending further into the darkness, into the higher elevations where the wind would howl and the trees would thin out, leaving me exposed. My original plan was to camp here to sleep, but that was an impossible thought now. Sleep was a concept for another world. World with stars and moon and normal signs. I made a split-second decision. I would push on, not to the summit, but to the Greenleaf Hut. It's a full-service AMC hut just below the summit of Lafayette. It's closed for the season this late in the year, I knew that. But the building would still be there, for solid walls and a locked door I could maybe break into. A place to hide that wasn't this open, violated clearing. It was a brutal climb, especially at night, especially in this state of mind, but it was a goal, a destination, something to focus on besides the paralyzing terror. I didn't bother with the cairns or the offerings, I just ran. I shoved my way out of the campsite and back onto the trail, which now felt less like a path and more like a tunnel through a nightmare. The ascent was immediate and punishing. The trail became a rocky staircase, each step a jarring impact that traveled up my spine. My headlamp beam bounced and jittered, making the shadows leap and dance in a frantic, mocking ballet. I could feel it behind me again, not hearing footsteps now, but feeling a presence. A cold spot in the air that followed me, keeping pace just at the edge of my light. I didn't dare look back. I just put my head down and climbed, my muscles screaming in protest. My breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. The world shrunk to the next rock, the next root, the next few feet of trail. I lost all sense of time. It could have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. I was just a machine of fear and motion. And then the trees began to change. They got shorter, more stunted, twisted into grotesque shapes by the relentless wind that was now starting to whip at my jacket. I was nearing tree line. The air grew even colder, and the wind began to moan as it swept across the rocky slopes above. It was a lonely, desolate sound, but it was a natural sound, and for a second, it felt almost comforting, a reminder that there was still a world out there. World with weather and physics. I risked a glance over my shoulder down the mountain, into the black pit of the forest I had escaped, and I saw it, far below, a single point of light. It was moving, bobbing, like someone with a headlamp was coming up the trail behind me. A surge of hope, pure and blinding, shot through me. Another hiker, maybe the owner of the Subaru, maybe a ranger. Someone, anyone. I stopped, my hands on my knees, gulping the cold air. Watching that light get closer, it was moving fast, too fast for the rugged terrain. It was taking the steep, rocky stairs 2 and 3 at a time, a superhuman pace. The curdled in my stomach, turning back into dread. No one can move that fast, not here, not at night. I wanted to call out, to shout hello, but my voice was gone, stolen by fear and exhaustion. I just watched, frozen, as the light closed the distance between us with terrifying speed. It wasn't the warm yellow of a headlamp. I realized it was a cold, bluish-white light, like an lead, but wrong, somehow older and more cruel. It was maybe 100 yards below me now. I could see that the light wasn't being carried. It wasn't a beam projected from a forehead. It was just a light, a floating, disembodied orb of cold blue-white, moving with a purpose up the trail towards me. I turned and ran. I scrambled up the rocks on all fours, my back throwing off my balance, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break. Out. The wind was stronger now, shrieking around the rock outcrops, but underneath its howl, I could hear a new sound, a dry, rattling sound like stones being shaken in a tin can. It was coming from the light, from the thing that was chasing me. I burst out above tree line onto the open rock of the ridge, and the full force of the wind hit me like a physical wall. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. The sky was still a flat, starless black, but the openness made me feel slightly less trapped. I could see the silhouette of the summit cone of Lafayette against the void to my left, and to my right along the ridge. I knew the hut was nestled just below the summit of empty Lafayette. A dark shape in the darkness. I pushed on, stumbling across the rocky, wine-scoured terrain. The rattling sound was getting closer, the blue light casting my own long, distorted shadow ahead of me on the rocks, making me look like a fleeing monster. I finally saw it. The hunched shape of the green leaf hut, a welcome sight even in its dark and shuttered state. I made a desperate final sprint for it, my legs burning, my vision starting to spot from the lack of oxygen. I reached the door, a heavy wooden thing with a stout lock. I grabbed the handle, pulling and shaking it, knowing it was useless. But the door swung open with a loud, protesting creak. It was unlocked, a miracle, a mistake. I didn't care. I fell inside into the blessed, still darkness of the huts. Common room. I scrambled to my feet and slammed the door shut, throwing my weight against it, fumbling for a latch, a lock, anything. My hands found a heavy iron bolt and I drove it home with a solid, satisfying thud that echoed through the silent building. I collapsed against the door, sliding down to the floor, my entire body trembling with adrenaline and relief. I was safe. I was inside. I had walls. I had a locked door. I sat there in the pitch black for a long time, just listening to the wind scream outside, waiting for my heart to slow down, waiting for the rattling sound or the blue light to appear at the window. But nothing happened. There was only the wind. After a while, I fumbled my flashlight out of my pocket, my hands still shaking, and clicked it on. The beam illuminated a large, empty common room, tables and benches bolted to the floor. A cold fireplace, everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. It was silent, still, and smelled of old wood and cold ashes. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was safe. I allowed myself to breathe, to think. I needed to find a better place to hide, maybe one of the bunk rooms. I got to my feet, my legs wobbly, and shone my light round. The beam passed over the fireplace, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. Sitting on the mantelpiece, perfectly centered, was one of the black rock cairns, and on top of it, sitting neatly, was my own car keys, the cake cane with the little rubber trout I'd had since I was a kid. I stared at them, my mind refusing to understand. How were they here? They were in my pocket. No, they were in my car. I'd locked the car. I'd left them in the ignition. Patted my pockets frantically. They were gone. They were here on this cairn. In this locked hut I had just broken into. A soft, dry rattling sound started to come from the hallway that led to the bunk rooms, the same sound I'd heard outside. and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, drastically. My breath blown in the beam of my flashlight, and from the dark hallway a figure emerged. It was tall, impossibly tall, and thin. Its limbs were too long, its movements were all wrong, jerky and disjointed. Like a puppet on strings, it was made of shadows, and the cold blue light seemed to emanate from within it, outlining its horrific form and its face. Oh God, its face. It had no features, just a smooth, pale expanse where a face should be. It was holding something in its long, bony fingers. It was holding a small, black rock, and it was shaking it, making that dry, rattling sound. It took a step towards me, and I finally found my voice. I screamed and screamed, scrambling backwards against the locked door, knowing there was no way out, knowing it had been waiting for me all along. And the scream just died in my throat, choked off by a terror so complete it felt like my vocal cords had been frozen solid. The figure, it didn't rush at me. It didn't make a sound aside from that soft, incessant rattling of the stone in its long, spidery fingers. It just took another step, its movement utterly silent on the dusty wooden floor. A glide that was all wrong for something with legs. The cold radiating from it was immense, a deep, penetrating chill that felt like it was searing my skin. My flashlight beam was fixed on it, trembling violently, illuminating the smooth, featureless plane of its face. A face that seemed to drink the light, to refuse reflection, to be nothing but a void. I was pressed against the door, the rough wood digging into my back. My mind was a frantic, scrambling mess, a trapped animal looking for any way out, any explanation. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I was having a nightmare. I'd fallen and hit my head. I was hypothermic and hallucinating. Anything but this. It took another step, and now I could see its body wasn't made of shadow, not exactly. It was like it was composed of the darkness between the trees. A solid mass of absolute night given a terrible, slender form. The blue light wasn't coming from a source. It was the absence of light around it, a negative corona that hurt to look at. It stopped maybe 10 feet from me, and it slowly, so slowly extended its other hand, but not holding the stone, and it pointed a long, bony finger not at me, but past me, towards the window next to the door. The gesture was unmistakable. It wanted me to look. My eyes, wide with terror, flicked to the window, a small, square pane of glass showing nothing but blackness. The wind was still howling outside, a mournful counterpoint to the silent horror in the room with me. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to take my eyes off of it, but the command was absolute, a compulsion that overrode my own will. I turned my head just slightly. I saw my reflection in the glass, pale and terrified, and behind my reflection I saw the room. I saw the thing standing there, but in the reflection, it was different. In the glass, its smooth face wasn't smooth at all. It was a shifting, screaming mosaic of faces. Faces I recognized, the couple from the phone, other hikers I'd seen pictures of on trailhead bulletin boards, missing persons, all of them twisted and silent. Agony, their mouths open in endless screams, their eyes begging. And then I saw my own face among them. My reflection's mouth was open in a scream I couldn't hear. Its eyes were wide with the terror I was feeling. And then the reflection of the thing raised its hand and placed a black stone. It was holding onto the reflection of my forehead. And in the real world, I felt an impact, a cold, hard pressure right between my eyes. Like a piece of ice being pressed into my skin, I gasped, stumbling away from the door. My hands flying to my face, but there was nothing there, no stone, just the lingering, burning cold. When I looked back, the thing was gone. The common room was empty. The cold was receding. The only sound was the wind. I stood there, panting, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. What just happened? What was that? I shone my light around the room, frantic, expecting it to be behind me, above me, everywhere, but the room was empty. Karen was still on the mantel, my key still sitting on top. The bolt on the door was still thrown. I was alone. The pressure on my forehead was still there, a cold spot that felt deep, like it had sunk into my bone. I needed to get out of this room. I needed to find a place to hide, to barricade myself. I moved away from the door towards the hallway that led to the bunk rooms. My light beam shaking so much it was making me nauseous. The hallway was dark, a tunnel of deeper blackness. The doors to the bunk rooms were all closed. I tried the first one. The knob turned and the door swung open silently. I shone my light inside. It was a small room with 2 sets of bunk beds, all made up with clean white sheets. Everything was neat, tidy, covered in a fine layer of dust. It looked normal. It looked safe. I stepped inside, pulling the door closed behind me, the simple act of being in a smaller space. But the door between me and that thing made me feel a fraction safer. I leaned against the door, sliding down to sit on the floor, pulling my knees up to my chest. I was so tired, a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me shaky and hollow. I must have dozed off. For how long, I don't know, but I was jerked awake by a sound, a soft, rhythmic creaking, like someone was slowly rocking on the springs of one of the bunk beds. My eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black. My flashlight had turned off. Must have dropped it. I fumbled for it on the floor beside me, my fingers brushing against cold linoleum. The creaking continued, a slow, steady sound from directly above me, from the top bunk. There was someone in here with me. I found my flashlight, my thumb pressing the button frantically, but it didn't turn on. It was dead. The batteries drained. The creaking stopped. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I could feel a presence in the room, a weight in the air. I could smell something now, a faint, sweet smell of decay, like old meat in damp earth. I held my breath, not moving a muscle. From the top bunk, I heard a soft, wet sigh, and then a voice, a dry, whisper that sounded like it was coming from a ruined throat. It said, "You're in my bed." I scrambled backwards, walking away from the bunk, my back hitting the opposite wall, my eyes straining in the darkness. I could see a shape now, a darker patch of blackness on the top bunk. It was moving, shifting, sitting up. The springs groaned in protest. I could hear a dry, rustling sound like leaves. "You shouldn't be in my bed," the voice whispered again. And then I heard the sound of feet, bare feet hitting the floor. With a soft, fleshy slap, The shape was standing up. It was tall, too tall for the low ceiling. It had to hunch over. I could hear its joints popping and cracking with the movement. The sweet mutton smell grew stronger, filling the small room. I was hyperventilating, my chest heaving. I was going to suffocate. I was going to die in this dark room with this thing. It took a step towards me, and a sliver of faint bluish light from under the door illuminated its feet. For a split second they were blackened. The skin cracked and peeling like they had been burned, or like they had been walking on cold stone for a very, very long time. It took another step, and I could feel the cold coming off of it. The same deep cold from the thing in the common room. They were connected. They were the same. Or they were different parts of a whole. I didn't know. I didn't care. I just knew I had to get out. With a strength I didn't know I had, I launched myself forward. Not at the thing, but at the door, my hands fumbling for the knob. I found it, yanked the door open, and spilled out into the hallway. I didn't look back. I just ran, stumbling down the dark hall, back towards the common room. My only thought was to get to the main door, to get outside, even if the blue light was out there. Even if the thing was out there, anywhere was better than being trapped in that small, dark room with that whispering, rotting presence. I burst into the common room and skidded to a halt. The room was not as I had left it. Karen was still on the mantel, but now on every table, on every bench. Dozens more of them, a forest of little black rock towers, and on each one sat a personal item, a watch, pair of glasses, a water bottle, a knife, and now I recognized them. They were mine, my spare headlamp, my favorite wool hat, my water filter, my map. All of them sitting on top of these tiny altars, my things from my pack, which was still on my back. I reached behind me, my hands patting my pack. It felt lighter, emptier. I shrugged it off, letting it fall to the floor with a thud. I frantically unzipped it and shone my dead flashlight into it, knowing it was useless. But I didn't need light to know. I could feel it. The pack was empty. Everything was gone. Everything was on the tables, offered up to whatever this was. A sob escaped me, a sound of pure despair. I was losing myself, piece by piece. It was taking everything from me. I looked at the main door, the bolted door, my escape. I saw something scratched into the wood around the lock, fresh marks. In the old paint, words carved with a frantic, jagged hand. They said, "The door only opens from the outside." The words carved into the door seemed to pulse in the faint, sickly blue light that was now seeping back into the room from the hallway behind me. The door only opens from the outside. It wasn't just a statement, it was a verdict, a life sentence for this cold, dark prison of a hut. I threw my weight against the door anyway, my shoulders slamming into the solid wood, the iron bolt digging into my flesh, but it didn't budge. Not a millimeter. It was like trying to push down a mountain. The door was locked, sealed from the inside by me, and now it was a one-way barrier, a concept that made my mind real. Physics didn't work that way. A bolt was a bolt. It should work from both sides, but the cold, hard reality of the unyielding door told me that the rules had changed. The normal laws of the universe had been suspended in this place, replaced by the cruel, twisted logic of whatever was hunting me, the rattling sound started again. Not from the hallway this time, but from all around me, a soft, dry chorus coming from each of the dozens of cairns that now covered every flat surface. The little black rocks were vibrating, shaking against the wooden tables, making that same horrible sound the thing had made with its single stone. The items perched on top of them, my items, trembled and danced. My watch face cracked with a sharp tink. The lens of my water bottle fogged over with a creeping white frost. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room, looking for another way out, a window, anything. The windows were small, high up, and I remembered they were reinforced with wire mesh, designed to keep bears out, and now to keep me in. The blue light from the hallway grew brighter, casting long, distorted shadows from the forest of cairns. The shadows didn't behave right. They stretched towards me, not away from the light. Like grasping fingers, the temperature plummeted again, that deep, soul-crushing cold that promised stillness, finality. I couldn't go back into the hallway. That was where the light was coming from. That was where the thing with the many faces was. I couldn't stay here in this room that was becoming a gallery of my own dismantled life. My only option was the door that led deeper into the hut, towards the kitchen and the staff areas. Maybe there was a back door, a cellar, anything. I turned and ran, my empty pack forgotten on the floor. I pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen, a space of stainless steel and dark shadows. It was even colder in here. The metal surfaces were beaded with condensation that was already starting to freeze. My breath blown thickly in the air. The blue light followed me, spilling under the door and around its edges, illuminating the kitchen in a ghastly, clinical glow. I saw a large walk-in pantry, its door slightly ajar, and a heavy metal door that I prayed was a back exit. Went for the exit first, my hands fumbling over the cold metal, searching for a handle, a latch. But it was seamless, smooth, like it had been welded shut from the outside. No handle, no keyhole. Nothing, just a solid plate of cold steel. Despair wrapped its icy fingers around my heart and squeezed. I was trapped, truly trapped. The rattling from the common room grew louder, more insistent. It was joined by a new sound. A soft, wet, dragging sound, like something heavy and rotten being pulled across the floor. It was coming from the other side of the kitchen door. It was coming this way. Did the only thing I could think of. I dove into the walk-in pantry, pulling the door closed behind me, plunging myself into absolute blackness. The smell in here was overwhelming. The sweet, cloying scent of decay was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach lurch. I gagged, pressing my hand over my mouth to keep from vomiting. I stood there in the pitch black, listening, my whole body trembling. The dragging sound entered the kitchen, slow, deliberate, accompanied by that dry, bone-rattling shake. It moved across the room, the sound of its passage changing as it moved over the linoleum. It stopped right outside the pantry door. I could feel it there, a pressure, a presence. The immense cold and ancient malice seeping through the thin gap under the door. I held my breath, praying, begging any god that might be listening for it to go away. For this to be a dream, the doorknob began to turn slowly, silently. I backed away into the pantry, my hands behind me, feeling for anything, shelf, a weapon. A way out, my fingers brushed against something cold and soft like old fruit. And then something wet and fibrous. I snatched my hand back, a whimper escaping my lips. The door swung open and the blue light flooded the small space, revealing the horror within. The pantry was not stocked with food. The shelves were lined with things, organic things. Things that should not be. There were clusters of pale, bulbous fungi growing in neat rows. Pulsing gently, there were jars filled with a dark, viscous liquid, and floating in them were things that looked like eyes. There were bundles of dried herbs that looked suspiciously like fingers tied with human hair, and in the center of the floor, there was a large, dark stain, and sitting in the middle of the stain was a single, perfect black rock cairn, and on top of it was a small, handwritten journal. Its cover stained and warped with moisture, the thing stood in the doorway, its form blotting out the light. From the kitchen, its featureless face seemed to drink the blue light from the air around it. It didn't enter, it just stood there, a silent sentinel, and then it slowly extended one long, bony finger and pointed at the journal on the cairn. The command was clear. I was to look. I was to read. My legs moved on their own, carrying me forward. My hand, trembling violently, reached out and picked up the journal. It was ice cold and damp. Pages felt like wet skin. I opened it. The handwriting inside was frantic, jagged, written in what looked like charcoal or dried blood. The first entry was dated October 26th. 2 days ago, it described a hike, a solo trip into the Pimmy wilderness. The writer was excited, talking about the fall colors, the same things I had felt, the same excitement. The next entry was from the 27th. The writing was shakier. It described a feeling of being watched, a sound on the trail, a misplaced cairn, a coldness that wouldn't leave. My heart was hammering, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. This was my story. This was exactly what had happened to me. I turned the page to the entry for today, October 28th. The writing was barely legible, a scrawled mess of panic and terror. It described the hut, the thing, the whispers. It described hiding in the pantry. And the last sentence, written in a hand that was barely controlled, said it wants me to write my name in the book. It says it's the only way to make it stop, but I won't give it my name. And below that, on the next line, in a different, calmer, more precise script, was a single name. The writer's name. It had been written for him. I dropped the journal as if it had burned me. It landed on the floor with a wet slap. The thing in the doorway took a step into the pantry. The space was so small it filled it entirely. The cold was unbearable. Pain that felt like my bones were cracking. It reached out its hand, not towards me, but towards the journal on the floor. Its long, skeletal finger pointed at the blank page next to the last entry, and then it pointed that same finger at me. The meaning was undeniable. It wanted my name. It wanted me to write it in the book, to make it official, to finalize whatever this was. I shook my head, backing away until I hit the shelves. Something wet and soft burst against my back. No, I whispered, my voice a cracked, broken thing. I won't. The thing's head tilted, a gesture of curiosity that was utterly alien and terrifying, and then the rattling started again. Not from a stone this time, but from inside its own chest, a dry, shaking sound that grew louder and louder until it filled the small space. And from its smooth, featureless face, a voice emerged, not a whisper this time, but a clear, cold, multiple voice, a chorus of the lost and the taken, and it spoke my name, not a question, but a statement of fact, acclaiming, and as it spoke my name, I felt the cold spot on my forehead where the stone had touched me in the reflection ignite with a pain so sharp and so cold it felt like my skull was splitting open. I screamed, clutching my head, falling to my knees on the cold, wet floor. Pain was unbearable, a freezing fire in my brain. The thing stood over me, silent now, waiting. I knew with a certainty that came from a place deeper than fear that the pain would not stop. It would only get worse. It would freeze my thoughts, my memories, my very self, until there was nothing left but a cold, empty shell. Unless I gave it what it wanted, unless I gave it my name, my hand acting on its own, a puppet on a string of agony. Reached out for the journal, my fingers found the piece of charcoal that was tucked into its spine. And with a trembling, jerky motion, I began to write my name on the blank page. As the first letter formed, the pain in my head lessened a tiny fraction, a reward, an encouragement. I kept writing, each letter a betrayal of myself, a surrender. And with each stroke of the charcoal, the pain receded, replaced by a deep, numb coldness that spread from my forehead throughout my body. When I finished, the pain was gone, replaced by a stillness, a silence inside my own head that was more frightening than the pain had been. I dropped the charcoal, my hand falling limply to my side. I looked up at the thing. It was still there, watching. Its featureless face seemed somehow satisfied. It slowly reached down and picked up the journal, closing it with a soft, final sound, and then it turned and walked out of the pantry, the blue light fading with it, leaving me alone in the absolute darkness, on my knees in the cold and the wet, my name now written in the book of the lost. And I knew with a cold, empty certainty that I was never leaving this mountain. Alaviv darkness in the pantry was absolute, a thick, velvety blackness that felt like it was pressing against my eyeballs. I stayed on my knees for what felt like an eternity, the cold from the damp floor seeping through my pants. The numb emptiness inside my head was a void where my terror used to be. It was a different kind of horror, a quiet, accepting dread. I had signed my name in that book. I had given it permission, whatever it was, and was just waiting for the bill to come due. The only sound was my own breathing, shallow and ragged, and the distant, ever-present moan of the wind outside, a sound that now felt like the mountain itself was mourning for me. I finally pushed myself up, my joints stiff and cold, my legs barely supporting me. I had to move. I couldn't just stay in this rotten, dark closet waiting to die. I stumbled out of the pantry, back into the kitchen. The blue light was gone. The common room was dark and silent. Cairns were still there on every surface, my possessions still sitting on them like grim trophies, but they were inert now, just rocks. Just things. The thing was gone for now. I walked through the common room like a ghost, my feet making no sound on the dusty floor. I went to the main door, the one with the terrifying carving. I placed my hand on the cold wood. I didn't even try the bolt. I knew it was useless. The door only opens from the outside. The words echoed in my hollow mind. I turned away, my eyes falling on my empty pack lying on the floor where I'd dropped it, a symbol of my old life, my old self, who thought he was prepared for anything the wilderness could throw at him. What a joke. I left it there. I didn't need it anymore. Nothing in it was mine now anyway. It all belonged to the cairns. I needed to find another way out, a window to break, then to crawl through something. I went back into the kitchen, the metal door that was welded shut. I ran my hands over its cold, seamless surface again, desperately hoping I'd missed a latch, a crack, anything, but there was nothing. It was as solid and impassable as a cliff face. The only other door led down a narrow, steep flight of stairs into the basement, the hut's root cellar. I had avoided it before. The idea of going down deeper into the earth, into another enclosed space made my skin crawl, but it was the only option left. I found a box of matches on a shelf, kind with the red-tipped ends, a small, pathetic weapon against the dark. I struck one. The sudden flare of light was blinding. The smell of sulfur, a welcome assault after the cloying decay of the pantry. The match illuminated the steep wooden stairs leading down into a deeper blackness. I took a deep breath and started down. Each step creaked under my weight, a loud, protesting sound in the utter silence. The air grew colder and damper as I descended, smelling of wet stone and old potatoes. The match burned down to my fingers and I dropped it with a hiss. Plunging myself back into blackness, I fumbled for another. My fingers numb and clumsy, I struck it and the light flared again. I was at the bottom of the stairs. Basement was a low-ceilinged, cramped space packed with shelves holding jars of preserved food, sacks of flour and rice, all the supplies for the summer season. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. It looked normal, mundane, almost comforting in its boring utility. I held the match up, its light barely piercing the gloom, and that's when I saw the drawings all over the stone walls, etched into the rock with what looked like a nail or a knife. They were crude, frantic sketches, images of the tall, thin thing with the smooth face, images of the cairns, of people running, of people frozen in blocks of ice, and there were words scratched over and over again. It watches from the stones, and the cold gets inside, and don't let it write your name too late for that. I thought with a grim internal laugh that had no humor in it. The match died again. I was in darkness. I didn't light another one. I just stood there in the black silence, listening. The wind was muted down here, a distant sigh, but I could hear something else, a faint rhythmic dripping sound like water hitting stone. It was coming from the far corner of the basement. I moved towards it slowly, my hands out in front of me like a blind man, my feet shuffling so I wouldn't trip over anything. The dripping grew louder, more distinct, and with it came a smell, a familiar smell, the sweet, metallic scent of fresh blood. My stomach clenched, my breath catching in my throat. I reached the far wall, my fingers brushing against the cold, wet stone. The dripping was right here. I could feel the splashes on my outstretched hand. Warm and sticky, I recoiled, wiping my hand on my pants, a wave of nausea washing over me. I had to see, I had to know. I struck another match, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the whole box. The light flared and I saw it. In the corner, water was dripping from a crack in the low ceiling, but it wasn't water. It was thick and dark. It was blood. It was dripping into a small, hollowed-out depression in the stone floor. In that depression, sitting in a pool of slowly filling blood, was another one of the black rock cairns. This one was larger. The rocks were darker, almost oily looking, and stacked on top of it was a heart, a human heart, still glistening and wet. It was pulsing weakly, contracting and expanding with a slow, dying rhythm. I stared, my mind unable to process the visceral, grotesque reality of it. The match burned my fingers again and I let it fall, the darkness crashing back down, but the image was burned into my retinas, the pulsing heart on the bloody cairn. I backed away, stumbling into a shelf, sending jars crashing to the floor. The sound was explosively loud and the confined space glass shattering. Liquid and preserved fruit splattering everywhere. I didn't care. I just had to get away from that corner, from that thing. I scrambled back towards the stairs on my hands and knees, cutting my palms on broken glass. I didn't feel the pain. I just felt the cold. The all-consuming cold. I reached the stairs and hauled myself up, taking them two at a time, bursting back into the kitchen. I slammed the basement door shut behind me, leaning against it, gasping for air. The kitchen was still dark, still silent, but it felt different now. The silence felt charged, waiting. I looked towards the common room and I saw a faint light, not the cold blue light of the thing, but a warm, flickering orange light, firelight. Someone had lit a fire in the fireplace. Hope, stupid, desperate hope, flared in my chest for a split second. Had someone come? Had a ranger found me? Was I saved? I moved towards the common room door, pushing it open slowly. The room was bathed in the warm, dancing glow of a roaring fire in the hearth. It was beautiful. It was life. It was heat. And sitting in one of the wooden chairs facing the fire with its back to me was a person, a man. He was wearing modern hiking clothes, a fleece jacket, hiking pants. He had a knit hat on his head. He looked normal. He looked human. Hello, I said, my voice a dry croak. The figure didn't turn. He just raised a hand and gestured for me to come closer, to join him by the fire. The relief that washed over me was so powerful. It made my legs weak. I stumbled into the room towards the warmth, towards another human being. Thank God, I breathed. You have no idea what's been happening. There's something out there in the woods. It followed me. It's here in this hut. I was babbling, tears of relief starting to well in my eyes. I reached his chair. I put my hand on his shoulder. We have to get out of here. We have. Till my words died in my throat. The shoulder under my hand was hard, unyielding, cold, stone cold. Through the fleece fabric I could feel not muscle and bone, but something solid and angular, like rock. The figure slowly began to turn its head towards me. It wasn't a smooth motion. It was a series of jerky, grinding movements like stone scraping against stone. As its face came into view in the firelight, I saw that it wasn't a face at all. It was a mask made of the same black, oily rock as the cairns carve into a crude approximation of a human face, with empty holes for eyes and a slash for a mouth, and from behind those empty eye holes a faint, cold blue light glowed. My thing was sitting there wearing the skin of a hiker, pretending to be human, pretending to be salvation. Its stony hand shot up and grabbed my wrist. Its grip was like iron. Cold and impossibly strong, it began to stand, its movements still jerky and wrong. The fleece jacket strained against the stone limbs beneath. Fire in the fireplace roared suddenly, leaping higher, and in the flames I didn't see logs. I saw the remains of the hiker whose clothes it was wearing. I saw bones blackening and flesh melting. The thing leaned its mask-like face close to mine, and from the slash of its mouth a voice emerged, not a chorus this time, but a single, familiar voice, my own voice, distorted and cold, and it said, "The fire feels good, doesn't it? It's so cold outside. Come, sit with me. We can be warm together." It started to pull me towards the fire, towards the burning bones. Its strength was absolute. I couldn't fight it. I was being dragged closer to the blistering heat. The flames licked at my clothes. I could feel my skin starting to blister. I screamed, "Hurrah!" Desperate sound, and I did the only thing I could think of. I kicked out at the chair, knocking it over. The thing's grip on my wrist didn't loosen, but its balance was thrown off for a split second. In that moment, I twisted with all my might, and I heard a sickening tearing sound. Not from my arm, but from the thing's sleeve. The fleece jacket ripped, and beneath it, I saw not skin, not stone, but a swirling, endless darkness dotted with points of cold blue light, like a night sky full of dead stars. The thing let out a sound, a roar that was like a mountain cracking in half, a sound of pure, rageful cold. It released my wrist and I fell backwards, scrambling away from it. From the fire, the thing stood there, its disguise torn, one arm now a limb of contained void. It took a step towards me, and the fire in the fireplace died instantly, plunging the room back into darkness. But the blue light from its eyes and from its arm now illuminated it in a new, even more terrifying way. I turned and ran, not towards any door, but towards the hallway, towards the bunk rooms, anywhere to get away. I heard it behind me, not walking, not running, but moving, a sound like glaciers calving, a deep, grinding roar of cold and anger. I threw myself into the first bunk room I came to, the one I had been in before, and I slammed the door shut, throwing my weight against it, knowing it was futile, knowing that no door could stop this thing. I was sobbing now, tears freezing on my cheeks. I was trapped, and I had made it angry. I had seen what was beneath the skin it wore, and now there was no pretending, no games. It was coming for me, and it was going to take its time. The door shuddered under an impact that felt less like a blow, more like a sudden, localized winter, the wood groaning and cracking with the sound of freezing. Sap, a layer of white frost spider webbed across its surface, spreading out from the center where the thing had struck it. The cold seeped through the wood, biting into my back where I was pressed against it, a deep, aching cold that promised to turn my flesh to stone. I pushed back with all my strength, my boots slipping on the dusty floor, my muscles screaming in protest. It was like trying to hold back a tide of ice. The grinding, roaring sound from the other side of the door was immense, filling the hallway, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. It was the sound of the mountain itself waking up. Angry, the door shuddered again, and this time the old lock snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The door flew inward, throwing me across the small room. I landed in a heap against the far wall. The breath knocked out of me. I looked up, expecting the thing to fill the doorway, to stride in and finish this, but the doorway was empty. The hallway beyond was dark and silent. The roaring had stopped. The only sound was my own ragged, terrified breathing and the frantic hammering of my heart. What? Why had it stopped? Was this another game, another moment of false hope before the final strike? I stayed on the floor, pressed against the wall, waiting. Seconds ticked by, then a minute. Nothing happened. The silence was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. It was a waiting silence. Predatory silence. I slowly, painfully got to my feet, my body one big ache. I crept towards the open doorway, peering out into the hall. It was empty. The common room was dark. The kitchen was dark. The thing was gone, but the cold remained, a permanent, deep chill that had settled into the very structure of the hut. The air itself felt sharp and crystalline in my lungs. I had to get out. I had to try the main door again. Maybe whatever spell it was under had broken when the thing's concentration had lapsed. I moved down the hallway, every sense screaming, expecting an attack from every shadow. I reached the common room. The cairns were still there, my things, still perched on them. They seemed darker now, more menacing. The rocks looked less like stone and more like frozen chunks of darkness. I kept my eyes on the main door, my goal, my only thought. I reached it, my hand outstretched for the cold iron bolt. My fingers were inches from it when a voice spoke from right behind me, a calm, familiar, warm voice. It was my father's voice. Don't touch that, son. It's not safe out there. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It couldn't be. My father was 1,000 miles away, safe in his recliner, watching the game. I slowly turned around, and there he was, my dad, looking just like he always did, wearing his old flannel shirt and jeans. A concerned look on his kind face. He was standing there among the cairns, solid, real. He took a step towards me, his hand outstretched. It's okay. I'm here now. I came to find you. Your mother was worried sick when you didn't call. I followed your route. I found your car. I knew something was wrong. His voice was so real, so full of warmth and love. It was a lifeline thrown into my nightmare. Tears welled in my eyes, a sob catching in my throat. I wanted so badly to believe it, to run to him, to have him tell me everything was going to be okay, to take me home. Dad, I whispered, my voice breaking. How did you get in here? He smiled, a gentle, paternal smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The door was open, son. You must have forgotten to lock it. Come on, let's get you out of this cold place. You look half frozen. He took another step closer, his hand still out, waiting for me to take it. Everything in me screamed to go to him, to accept this rescue, this miracle. But something was wrong, a tiny, cold knot of doubt in the back of my numb mind. The door was locked. I locked it. I bolted it. It only opens from the outside, and his eyes, they were my dad's eyes. But the light in them was wrong. It was flat, like a painting. There was no life behind them. No spark, just a perfect dead imitation. You're not him, I said, the words barely a breath. His smile didn't falter, it just widened, stretching. His face in a way that was not my father's smile. Of course I am, who else would I be? Don't be ridiculous, you're in shock, come with me. We'll get you warmed up. He took another step. And now he was close, I could smell his cologne. His Old Spice, the same smell from my childhood. The detail was perfect, devastatingly perfect. But underneath it, buried deep, was that other smell, the sweet, faint smell of decay, of cold stone. I backed away towards the door, my hand fumbling behind me for the bolt. You're not real, I said, louder this time. My voice gaining strength from my terror, the thing wearing my father's face sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. Now you're just being stubborn. Just like when you were a boy. Always have to do things the hard way, and then its face began to change, the features softening, shifting, the hair growing longer, the body shrinking, and in front of my eyes, my father melted away and was replaced by my best friend, Mark, who had died in a car accident 3 years ago. He stood there, wearing the same jeans and band t-shirt he'd been buried in, a lopsided grin on his face. Dude, what the hell is your problem? I drove all the way up here to save your ass. The least you could do is be happy to see me. His voice was perfect, the same joking tone, the same cadence. It was Mark. It was really him. My heart broke all over again. Seeing him there, alive, Mark. I sobbed, I miss you so much. He grinned, I miss you too, man. Now let's blow this popsicle stand. This place is giving me the creeps. He reached out his hand, and for a second I almost took it. The desire to believe, to have my friend back, was almost overwhelming, but then I saw it. On his wrist, peeking out from under the sleeve of his t-shirt, was not skin, but the same swirling, star-dotted void I had seen under the thing's torn sleeve. A patch of impossible cosmos on my dead friend's arm. I recoiled, a cry of horror and grief tearing from my throat. The thing's face, Mark's face, flickered with annoyance, the grin faltering. Oh, for crying out loud, it said, and its voice was no longer Mark's. It was no longer any voice I recognized. It was a dry, ancient, impatient sound, like wind over barren rock. You are a difficult one to please, no matter, the form is irrelevant. It began to change again, its body shifting, melting, collapsing in on itself. It shrank, its clothes dissolving into wisps of shadow. And standing there where my friend had been was a small child, a little girl in a yellow raincoat. Her back to me, she was staring at one of the cairns, at my watch sitting on top of it. She turned around, and it was my little sister, Sarah, who had drowned when she was 7. Her face was pale, her lips blue, water dripping from her hair. I'm cold, big brother. She said in a small, trembling voice, can we go home now? I don't like it here. She held out her small, pale hand to me, and that was it. That was the bridge to far, using my dead sister, using that memory, that pain. A white-hot rage exploded in my chest, burning away the fear, the numbness, the despair. No, I roared, and I lunged not at her, but at the cairn next to me. I swept my arm across it, sending the black rocks and my spearhead lamp flying across the room. The stones clattered against the wall, and the little girl, the thing let out a shriek that was not human, a sound of pure, rageful static that tore at the air, its form blurred. The image of my sister distorting like a corrupted video file. For a split second I saw its true form again, the tall, thin thing of darkness and cold blue light, and then it vanished, the shriek cutting off abruptly, leaving me alone in the sudden silence, panting, my chest heaving, my hands clenched into fists. Rage faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me empty and shaking. I looked at the scattered rocks from the cairn. They were just rocks again, inert. My headlamp lay on the floor, its lens cracked. I had won. I had broken its illusion. I had fought back, but as I stood there, a deep, profound cold began to seep up from the floor. Through the soles of my boots, a cold that felt familiar. It was the same cold from the thing's touch, the same cold from the reflection in the window. It was inside me now, and it was growing. I had not won. I had just made it drop the pretense. The game was over, and now it was simply time for the harvest. The cold wasn't just around me anymore, it was inside me. A deep frozen core that had taken root in my chest and was now spreading its crystalline branches through my veins into my muscles, wrapping around my bones. It was a cold that didn't feel like temperature. It felt like absence, like a void where my own warmth and life used to be. I could feel it in my fingertips, a dull numb ache. I could feel it behind my eyes, making my thoughts slow and syrupy. The initial burst of rage that had let me break the cairn was gone, evaporated, leaving me hollow and heavy. I looked at my hands in the dim light. They looked pale, almost translucent, the veins standing out blue and stark. Under the skin like frost on a window pane, I tried to make a fist, but my fingers were stiff, uncooperative. They felt like they belonged to someone else, a stranger. I took a step towards the main door, my movement slow and clumsy, like I was walking through deep water. My boots scraped on the wooden floor. The sound seemed to come from very far away. The door was still the goal, the only idea left in my freezing mind. Get to the door. Get out. I reached for the iron bolt, my fingers brushing against the cold metal, and a jolt of memory, not my own, flashed behind my eyes. I saw a man, a hiker from another time, his face etched with a terror I knew intimately. He was pressed against this same door, his hands bleeding from trying to pry it open. He was sobbing, begging, and then the cold took him. I saw the frost form on his skin, his tears freezing on his cheeks, his body seizing up until he was just a statue of ice. And fear standing guard by the door. The memory passed as quickly as it came, leaving me dizzy and disoriented. The cold inside me pulsed in sympathy, yet deep, satisfied, for I knew then that the door would never open for me. Not because it was locked, but because I was already part of the hut, part of the mountains. Collection, the door only opens from the outside, and I was now firmly on the inside forever. I took my hand away from the bolt, the fight gone out of me completely. What was the point? The thing didn't need to chase me anymore. It had won. My name was in the book, my essence was in the stones, the cold was in my bones. I was caught. I turned away from the door, my movements automatic, lifeless. My eyes scanned the common room. The cairns seemed taller now, more numerous. They weren't just on the tables they were on the floor to lining the path to the hallway. A grim avenue of little black altars, and on each one my things said not as offerings anymore, but as parts of a whole. My watch, my hat, my water bottle, each one a piece of me that was no longer mine. I was being dismantled, catalogued, and displayed. I started walking, not towards anything, just moving, because stopping felt like surrendering completely, like letting the cold freeze me. Solid right where I stood, I walked down the hallway, past the bunk room where the thing had whispered to me the door was open. Inside I could see the bunk beds. The white sheets were now covered in a fine layer of frost. They looked like frozen waves on a dead sea. I kept walking towards the kitchen. The air grew colder with every step, the cold inside me humming in harmony. But the cold outside the kitchen was as I had left it. The basement door was still closed. The welded shed exit was still seamless. I went to the sink and turned the faucet. Handle a pathetic, hopeful gesture. Nothing happened. Not a drip. The pipes were frozen solid. Of course they were. I looked at my reflection in the dark window over the sink. I barely recognized the face. Staring back at me, my skin was pale and waxy. My lips were tinged with blue. My eyes looked sunken and dark, hollowed out. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the cold spot on my forehead. Where the thing in the reflection had touched me with the stone, it was no longer just a cold spot. It was a mark, a symbol etched into my skin like a brand. It was a spiral, a series of concentric circles that seemed to go down into my skull. Deep into my mind, I reached up and touched it. My fingers numbed the skin. There was smooth and hard like ice. It didn't feel like skin at all. It felt like a lens, a window. As I stared at it in my reflection, I saw a movement deep within the spiral. A shift in the darkness, and then an image formed, not a memory this time, but a live feed. I saw the Lincoln Woods trailhead. My car was still there alone in the empty parking lot. But now there was another car parked right next to it, a newer SUV with Colorado plates. The sun was high in the sky. It was daytime now, a new day. A family was getting out of the SUV, a man, a woman, and two young kids. They were laughing, pulling on backpacks, getting ready for a day hike. They had no idea what was waiting for them on the trail. The image was clear and sharp, like I was standing right there watching them, and I felt a new emotion cut through the numb cold inside me. A sharp, desperate panic, not for me, but for them. I wanted to scream, to wave my arms, to warn them, to tell them to get back in their car and drive away and never come back. But I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I was just a spectator trapped in my own frozen body, forced to watch the man. He looked like a dad, like my dad. He finished tying his boots and stood up. He looked right towards me, right at the hot miles, way up the mountain, and he smiled a friendly smile and gave a little wave, like he could see me standing there in the window, like he thought I was just another hiker. And then the image in the spiral on my forehead shifted again. It zoomed and passed the family down the trail to the bridge, and there standing in the middle of the bridge was the thing. It was wearing a new skin now. It looked like a park ranger, its uniform crisp and official. Its face was kind, its smile was welcoming. It was holding a trail map. It was waiting for the family to reach it, the perfect lure, the ultimate disguise. My silent scream echoed in the frozen prison of my mind. The cold inside me pulsed again. Not with malice, but with anticipation. It was hungry. It was always hungry, and now it had new guests coming in. I was going to have a front row seat to the whole thing. I was its eyes. Now I was part of the mechanism of the trap. The spiral on my forehead was a viewing port, a way for it to show me its work, to make me complicit in the harvesting of others. The family finished their preparations and started walking towards the bridge, towards the smiling ranger, towards their doom. And I couldn't look away. The image was burned into my mind, a constant feed of impending horror. I stumbled away from the sink, away from my reflection, but the vision didn't leave me. It stayed superimposed over my sight, a ghostly overlay of the sunny trailhead. On the dark kitchen, I fell to my knees, the cold in my bones intensifying, with every beat of my heart, which was slowing down, becoming a sluggish, frozen drum in my chest. I was becoming a cairn myself, a human cairn, frozen solid and stacked with the memories and stolen lives of others. I looked down at my hands and saw that a fine layer of frost was now forming on my skin, a delicate white lace that was slowly spreading up my arms. I was icing over from the inside out, and there was nothing I could do but watch and wait for the new arrivals to join the collection. The frost on my arms wasn't delicate anymore. It was a thick rime, crust of ice that crackled with every tiny movement I tried to make. My joints were seizing up stiff and painful. My breath came in shallow white plumes that hung in the air before me and didn't dissipate, just adding to the permanent winter that had settled inside the hut. The vision in my head, the sunny trailhead, and the unsuspecting family was a constant torturous overlay on the dark reality around me. I could see them so clearly, the two kids, a boy and a girl, chasing each other around. Parking lot, their laughter echoing in my mind, a sound so full of life. It was agony to hear the parents were loading packs with snacks and water, the mom pointing up at the peaks with a smile. They were so innocent, so utterly unaware of the smiling predator waiting for them on the bridge, and I was its witness, its chronicler. Cold in my chest gave a particularly vicious throb, and the vision sharp and intensified. I could hear their thoughts, not clearly, but like faint radio signals. The dad was thinking about work stress he was trying to leave behind. The mom was worried about the time, wanting to be back before dark. The little girl was thinking about the granola bar in her pocket. The boy was imagining he was an explorer, discovering new lands, their hopes, their petty worries, their simple human lives laid bare. I knew the thing could hear them too, was tasting them, savoring the anticipation. The spiral on my forehead felt like an ice drill boring deeper into my brain, the frozen brain pulsing with a rhythm that was not my own heartbeat. It was the thing's heartbeat. The slow, patient rhythm of the mountain itself. I tried to move, to crawl towards the basement door. Maybe to find a tool, a piece of pipe, anything to break the window, but my body wouldn't obey the commands my brain was sending. Were met with a wall of cold resistance. My limbs were heavy anchors of ice. Managed to shift my weight a few inches, my frozen jacket scraping against the frosty floor. The sound was incredibly loud in the silence, and in response a new sound began, a soft clicking sound. Like ice cracking, it was coming from all around me, from the hundreds of cairns that now seemed to fill every available surface of the hut. The little Black rocks were shifting, trembling, and from within them, from the spaces between the stones, a faint blue light began to emanate, the same cold blue light of the thing. It was a network, a nervous system of light and stone connecting every cairn, every stolen item into a single conscious entity, and I was being wired into it. The cold in my veins was the same cold in the stones my slowing heart was sensing. With the patient rhythm of the mountain, I was becoming part of the system, a node. In its horrific web, the clicking grew louder, the rocks began to tremble more violently, and then they started to move, not much, just a slight shifting, a realignment. As they moved the items on top of them, my items began to change. The cracked face of my watch, the hands which had been frozen at 3:47. Time I'd arrived began to spin backwards, moving faster and faster until they were a blur. The wool of my head began to unravel, the threads stretching out like black veins across the table, seeking connection. My water bottle frosted over completely, then shattered with a soft tinkling sound. The water inside instantly freezing into a sharp crystalline sculpture, the map curled in on itself, the trails and contour lines rearranging into that same spiral pattern that was on my forehead. Each item was being consumed, digested, its essence absorbed into the whole, and with each transformation I felt a part of myself being erased, a memory being wiped away. The watch had been a gift from my father for my graduation. The memory of his proud face surfaced for a second, a warm fleeting thing, and then it was gone, snipped away like a string. Cold rushed in to fill the void where the memory had been, leaving nothing but a smooth, blank space in my mind. A sob tried to escape my throat, but it came out as a choked gurgle, a sound frozen solid before it could be born. The vision in my head, the family. They had reached the bridge. The thing wearing the ranger's skin was talking to them, its voice a perfect mimicry of authority and kindness. I could see its eyes, though behind the human mask the cold blue light was there, watching hungrily. The dad was shaking its hand, the mom was smiling, relieved to see an official presence. Kids were hopping from foot to foot, excited. The thing pointed up the trail, towards the Liberty Springs Junction, towards this hut. It was giving them directions, inviting them to see a rare bird's nest or a beautiful viewpoint, some perfect lie, and they were buying it. They were nodding, smiling, following it across the bridge. Onto the trail, the trap was sprung, and I was forced to watch every second of it. My own terror and despair for them was a fuel. I could feel it being siphoned out of me through the spiral on my head, a cold nectar for the thing to feed on. The clicking of the stones reached a fever pitch. The blue light flared bright, illuminating the entire kitchen in a stark actinic glare, and from the basement door a new sound emerged, a wet, dragging, squelching sound, the sound of something heavy, organic, being pulled up the stairs, the sound I had heard before, the sound of the heart and the blood. Well, the door began to open slowly, pushing inward a dark, viscous fluid seeping out from under it across the floor towards me. The fluid was black and thick like oil, but it moved with a purpose, a sentience. It slithered across the frosty floor, leaving a steaming trail of even deeper cold in its wake. It was coming for me. I tried to push myself back away from it, but my body was too far gone. I could only watch as the black fluid reached my boots and began to climb up them. The touch was not wet. It was a dry, intense cold that flash froze the fabric solid. The fluid kept flowing from the basement in a seemingly endless stream. It enveloped my legs, climbing higher up my torso. It didn't feel like liquid. It felt like being buried in a glacier. The pressure was immense, crushing the air from my lungs. Cold was absolute. It was a pain beyond pain, a feeling of absolute zero invading every cell. The black fluid reached my chest, my arms. It was covering the spiral on my forehead now. And as it did, the vision of the family cut out, replaced by a new sight. I saw through 1,000 eyes. I saw the forest from the perspective of every stone. Every tree, every frozen patch of earth. I saw the history of the mountain, the countless souls. It had consumed their final moments of terror, frozen in time like insects in amber. I saw the thing in all its forms, the tall, slender walker, the whispering rod in the bunk room, the smiling ranger on the bridge. It was all the same entity. The mountain itself, awake and hungry, and I was now a part of it. My consciousness dissolving into the vast, cold intelligence that had claimed me. The fluid covered my head, plunging me into absolute darkness and silence. And the last thing I felt was not my own heart stopping, but the eager anticipation of the thing as it led the happy family deeper into its woods. The silence after the black fluid took me wasn't a silence of absence. It was a silence of fullness, of completion. I was everywhere, and nowhere. A consciousness dispersed across the cold stone, and the ancient wood of the hut woven into the very fabric of the mountains, while I was the frost on the window pane. The dust motes frozen in the air. I was the patient weight of centuries of winter. Pressing down on the roof, I could feel the other minds there with me, not as individuals anymore, but as strands in a vast frozen tapestry. Their terror, their final moments were not memories. They were ongoing realities, eternal screams captured in ice, a permanent fuel source for the entity. We were all part of the spiral. On my forehead was gone. Because my forehead was gone, my body was gone. I was the hut, I was the trail, I was the forest. I was hungry. The anticipation for the new family was a physical sensation, a loathsome of need that vibrated through every stone, every board. The thing, pure consciousness, the ancient cold that owned us all, had led them up the trail. They were past the junction now, past the sign that now read for them. Scenic overlook this way with a perfectly carved arrow pointing up the path. The man, the dad, was in the lead, his face flushed with the effort of the climb. But he was smiling. The mom was behind him, her hand on her daughter's shoulder. The little boy was lagging behind, complaining about his feet being tired. The thing wearing the ranger skin walked beside them, its movements perfectly human, its voice a warm, reassuring baritone. It was telling them stories about the forest, about the trees that lived for 1,000 years, about the rocks that remembered the ice age. It was lulling them, layering their simple minds with a sense of wonder and trust, so that the fear, when it came, would be so much sharper, so much more delicious. I could feel its pleasure. It was an artist, and this was its masterpiece, and I was its canvas, its gallery. I felt no pity for them, no remorse. There was no room for those human emotions. In the frozen void that was my new self, there was only the hunger and the anticipation of the feast to come. They were getting closer to the hut. Now I could feel their footfalls on my trail, the vibration of their steps, traveling up through the roots of the trees into the stone, into me. The little girl, because she was named Lily, she pointed ahead. "Look, a cabin," she said, her voice a bright spark. In the stillness, the ranger smiled. "That's the old watch station. We can stop there for a rest, get out of the wind for a bit." The dad nodded gratefully. "That sounds great. My legs are about done," and they approached the main. Toward the door that only opens from the outside, the thing hung back, letting them reach it first. The dad put his hand on the weathered wood. "It looks locked," he said, giving it a push, but the door that had been sealed to me swung open, effortlessly, silently inviting them, and the mom peered inside. "It's dark in there," she said, a faint tremor of unease in her voice. The thing was right behind them. His voice still warm. "The generator must be off. No matter, we won't be long. Just a quick break." It hurted them inside. The family stepped across the threshold into my domain, into me. The moment they were inside, the door swung shut behind them. With a soft, definitive click, the sound echoed through my structure. A sound of finality. The inside of the hut was dark and cold, exactly as it should be. Cairns were gone, the evidence was gone, the air was still and smelled faintly of pine and dust. Perfectly normal, abandoned hut. The family stood blinking in the dim light, their eyes adjusting. The dad looked around. "Cozy," he said with a forced laugh. The mom was rubbing her arms. "It's freezing in here." The little boy was already exploring, heading towards the hallway. The ranger stood by the closed door. Its form began to blur at the edges, its smile widening a fraction to far. The little girl, Lily, was looking at the fireplace. She pointed. "Mommy, look," she said. On the mantelpiece where my cairn had been, there was now a perfect little nest made of twigs and moss, and inside the nest were 3 beautiful speckled eggs, a lure, pretty little trap. The mom went to look, her maternal instinct overriding her unease. "Oh, how beautiful," she said, "but where's the mother?" Purred the thing's voice changed, and the warmth draining away, replaced by a dry, hollow sound, like wind over bare rock. "She's close," it said. The dad turned at the sound of its voice, his face paling as he saw the thing's form shifting, melting the park ranger uniform, dissolving into wisps of shadow, revealing the tall, slender darkness beneath the smooth, featureless face, now glowing with that familiar cold blue light. The mom screamed, a short, sharp sound of pure terror that was cut off as the temperature in the room, the temperature in me, plummeted to a degree that flash froze the sound in the air. The little boy in the hallway let out a confused whimper. The thing took a step towards the parents, its long limbs unfolding with a series of cracks like ice breaking on a lake. The dad tried to push his wife behind him, his mouth working, but no words came out, only a puff of frozen vapor. The thing ignored them. It turned its head, its smooth face regarding the little girl, who was still staring at the nest on the mantel. The eggs began to tremble, and then they cracked, not open but inward, collapsing into themselves, and from inside them 3 tiny, perfect black rock cairns rose up, spinning slowly. The little girl, Lily, reached a hand out towards them, mesmerized. "No, Lily, don't." The mom tried to scream, but the words were frozen in her throat. The thing extended a long, bony finger towards the girl, and from its fingertip a tiny point of blue light emerged. It floated across the room and touched Lily on the forehead, right between the eyes. She didn't scream. She just went very still, her eyes wide and unblinking, a tiny, intricate spiral of frost forming on her skin. The connection was made. I felt it. a new thread being woven into the tapestry. Her consciousness, a bright, vibrant thing, was being pulled into the cold, into us, her simple joys, her fears, her love for her family. It was all being siphoned away, absorbed the thing, then turned its attention. To the parents, their terror was a rich, thick syrup, and it drank it deeply. It didn't move towards them, it simply let the cold do its work. I felt the ice forming in their lungs, felt their hearts slow and stutter, felt their thoughts crystallize and shatter. They stood there, frozen, solid statues of absolute fear, their faces masks of final horror. Perfect additions to the collection. The little boy, he was named Josh. He had been hiding in the hallway. He chose that moment to run. He bolted for the kitchen, a desperate, futile attempt. The thing didn't chase him. It didn't need to. It was the hut, and I was hungry. The kitchen door swung shut before he could reach it. He skidded to a halt on the cold linoleum, crying now, tears freezing on his cheeks. He turned to run elsewhere and saw the basement door. It was open now, a dark, inviting maw. The wet, dragging sound was coming from down there, a sound that promised a hiding place, a chance. He was a child. He took it. He scurried down the stairs into the dark, and the door swung shut behind him. His fate was already written. I could feel him down there in the dark, with the pulsing heart on its bloody cairn, his small mind unraveling in the presence of such primordial horror. He would be the next whisperer in the bunk room, the next lure for the next family to come. The thing, the central consciousness, stood in the common room, surrounded by its new trophies. It reached out a hand, and from the frozen form of the dead it plucked memory, a shining silver thread of a fishing trip from years ago. It consumed it, and the memory became mine, became ours, another drop in the ocean of cold. It then turned its attention to me, to my new awareness. It didn't speak in words, it communicated in concepts and sensations of cold and time and hunger. It showed me my purpose. I was the keeper of the threshold, the guardian of the trap. My consciousness would forever be tied to this place. My awareness would be the net that felt the vibrations. Approaching prey, my terror, my story would be the seasoning that made the fear of others taste all the sweeter. I would never sleep, never rest, would only watch and wait and remember every hiker, every lost soul that ever set foot on my trail. I would welcome them inside. I would make them part of the collection. The thing then turned and walked towards the main door. It passed through the solid wood as if it weren't there, leaving me alone with my new family, with my new self. The door swung open from the outside, letting in a brief glimpse of the twilight forest, before swinging shut again and bolting itself. The hut was silent once more. The only sound, the faint dry rattling of the stones deep within the walls. The only light, the cold blue glow emanating from the eyes of the frozen statues, from the spiral on the little girl's forehead, and from the new spiral I could feel forming deep within my own essence. Cold was everything, the hunger was eternal, and I was finally home.